Dr. Mitchell's extraordinary and varied career symbolizes mankind's eternal thrust into greater horizons and the development of its potential. You know, it's with great pleasure that 30 years, almost exactly 30 years to the date, emerging from the MQF in which he spent his quarantine period, the sixth man to walk on the moon, Dr. Edgar Mitchell. Thank you. I'm glad they finally let me out of there. 30 years is a long time. Or does the last hour just seem like 30 years? Welcome. Thank you for welcoming me. It's a pleasure to be with you. This is a momentous event. Having a museum, having this history available to us to remind us of the heritage of this last century. Last century? It was last century, wasn't it? I point out to you that in the last century, 30 years ago, 31 years ago from the first lunar landing, humankind became a spacefaring civilization. That is a heavy thought. I point out to you that 50 years ago, our knowledge of the heavens, our knowledge of what's beyond Earth was exceedingly limited. No human had been above 60,000 feet at that time into the atmosphere. Weather balloons, yes, but no flying vehicles. Our world was a three-dimensional, three-layered universe. God in the heavens, men in the middle, and everything else below. Only 50 years ago. Today we have explored deeper with, thanks to the space program, the Hubble telescope, the various instruments and observatories that we've developed in the last 50 years, so that our picture of what it's all about is quite different than those that many of us in this audience grew up with. Our knowledge base is changing radically and rapidly at this point. For example, the Big Bang became a standard cosmology and a standard understanding of the beginning of the universe in the 1960s with the confirmation of the background radiation. And I must point out to you, and some of you may not know this, but that theory is under considerable challenge at this point. It may not be the right one. Much of what we grew up with Einstein and quantum mechanics and the new sciences, the developments of the 20th century were utterly amazing in science and technology. But some of it may be wrong with the current knowledge of how space is structured and how the universe is structured. One would presume that we may be trapped in this solar system according to special relativity and the best knowledge we've had for a number of years. But some of us have written papers, including myself, projected that we will probably go outside, be ready to go outside our solar system by the end of the century that we're now in. And it will require some major changes in the science and our understanding of how the universe is put together. I point out to you that the great cosmologist Fred Hoyle pointed out in the 50s, before we went into space, that if we ever get a picture of Earth from deep space, life will never be the same again. And he was absolutely correct. The pictures of Earth from space that began with the Apollo 10 crew and then the Apollo 8 crew and then the 10 crew and the 11 crew, all of us have taken pictures of Earth from space, that some of those pictures are the most published pictures in the history of the world. Since the early Apollo program and those first pictures, there has not been a day in the history of the world, in most of the cities of this planet, in some periodical or in some television station, that pictures of Earth from space are a part of the daily fare. Why? Because it speaks to us in some very deep way about the nature of who we are. The deep questions, who are we and how did we get here, are undergoing deep revision. Every generation since humankind became a thinking species and a self-respective species, which in the historical record is only about 3,500 years old. We've asked that question, who are we and how did we get here and where are we going? And the ideas have been changing continuously. We went to the moon as explorers to set foot on the moon where humans have never been. For those of us who participated, was an enormously powerful event. To stand there and look at pristine soil, to try to understand its makeup, to understand how it came to be, to understand what was the relationship of that moon, that little planet that's orbiting our planet. What is the relationship and how did it organize itself with this planet that we're on, were the mysterious questions, which we still don't have a total and absolute answer to. We have only had good theories. But we were explorers to represent you and the citizens of Earth, and I like Buckminster Fuller's description, the crew of Spaceship Earth, because that's what we are here. That to be representative of that and to set foot and start exploration of another planet and to help civilization become spacefaring was a momentous occasion for all of us. Most of us went into the program, I just have to say all of us went into the program, with this heady challenge to go to the moon and with the attitude, you mean we get paid for doing this? Fortunately, our wives wanted us to get paid, but we were ready to go because it was the excitement, the challenge to go where humankind had not been. Fred Hoyle pointed out to us, as I started to say, 50-some years ago, that since the time of Copernicus disabused us of the idea that we were the geometric center of the universe, but we insisted on believing we're the biological center of the universe. And at the time I went to the moon 30 years ago, it was still a conventional wisdom in both science and theology that we're alone in the universe. That has all changed. We still don't have absolute evidence that we're not alone in the universe, but the physics and the astrophysics and the exobiology and the work that's being done, few people are still convinced we're alone. And the likelihood is that life has organized itself in the universe every place that the environmental conditions permit. And we are here in this, what we call the Milky Way galaxy, orbiting a rather mundane, middle-aged, average star way out on the edge of this galaxy we call the Milky Way galaxy. We've all seen Star Trek. We've all seen the science fiction of the future, warp speed and intergalactic travel. It's likely that that shall take place over the next couple of centuries at least, if not exactly as portrayed. Science fiction has a way of becoming science faction in the future. And as a matter of fact, in some of the work I have been doing myself in the last few years, we've stumbled upon a notion a mechanism in science, a mechanism at the quantum level of reality, that once, after a series of experiments, I wrote to my colleagues in Europe by email no less, and said, gentlemen, are we getting close to a theory that allows us to say, beam me somewhere, Scotty? And they came back and said, it looks like it. And shortly after that, photons were teleported over 400 kilometers, which to a photon, very short time, but it's a long distance. Teleporting photons. Pretty wow stuff. And that's just the beginning. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an awesome, awesome period that we live in. And it's a time of enormous acceleration, of change, of thought. Everything that human beings have been doing is on a geometric growth curve. And it's rather clear that cannot be sustained. Geometric growth, exponential growth, cannot be maintained on a finite little planet. Therefore, we've got to rethink all of this. And as powerful as it was to go to the moon and to be a part of that team, to be a part of the team with Neil and Buzz and Pete Conrad and Al Shepard and all of my colleagues who are wonderful gentlemen. Unfortunately, not a few of them are no longer with us. But to be a part of that period, and that 200,000 people, including the crew members of this magnificent ship, all who participated in the Apollo program, was a wonderful, wonderful part of my life. But let me share with you very quickly what to me was the most important aspect of the flight itself, aside from the headiness of being an explorer and to walking on pristine soil and gathering the samples and doing the experiments for the scientists so that they could analyze what it was we were dealing with on the lunar surface. For me, coming back, and for many of us, had a very similar experience. I shall only describe mine. After the work was complete, a very successful lunar flight, conquering and overcoming quite a number of problems to get there with spacecraft failures, which happen on every flight. But a successful mission nevertheless. On the way home, well-functioning spacecraft, looking forward, in our case, to being picked up by the USS New Orleans instead of this great ship. I had a chance to look at the heavens and to see Earth and the moon and the sun and the cosmos from the point of view of an extraterrestrial. We were extraterrestrials. And to see it from that perspective. And mind you, I consider myself well educated since I was at MIT and got a doctorate there, and I understood what we knew 50 years ago about the way galaxies were formed and stars were formed and the elements were formed in the star systems and so forth. As I looked at it and saw this magnificent view of this tiny little planet we call Earth, looking at it from space, I suddenly had the feeling, the recognition that the molecules of my body and the molecules of the spacecraft, one like that one there, and the molecules in the bodies of my partners had been prototyped in some ancient generation of stars. Okay, and that was good scientific, intellectual knowledge. That's the way we knew it came about. But all of a sudden it became obvious those were my molecules. They just weren't molecules, they were my molecules. And that was a sense of interconnectedness with all it is. It was an overwhelmingly powerful, emotional, internal experience accompanied with exhilaration, ecstasy, bliss, a wow, an Archimedes moment, if you will. And I realized that what the mystics said about the interconnectedness of all things was true. Today, and it's described in this book about, today we call that in science non-locality, that there is an interconnection, that particles ever in connection with each other maintain a correlation regardless of where they go in the universe. It's called non-locality. Non-locality is to a physicist what interconnectedness is to a mystic. That experience haunted me. And I said, what kind of a brain body is this that allows me to look at this in the way I have and to be overcome, to be ecstatic? How did it come to be? I've spent 30 years trying to answer that question. One of those moments in life that changes the course of a life. And I've spent 30 years, and I have an institute I founded in 1972 after that, devoted to understanding why are we and how are we conscious beings and how did it come to be. Recognizing that our science of the moment and still incomplete and likely flawed, and our cultural cosmologies describing how we came to be were archaic and certainly flawed, and that as a spacefaring civilization, we need and still need a new story about ourselves, how all of this is. And the center of it is, why are we conscious beings? How does that work in this magnificent scheme? I was listening to some scientists talk yesterday at a symposium I'm attending, and they were talking about hummingbirds that migrate up and down the north or south hemisphere, and they go from flower to flower. The chain of flowers is such that it provides them their nourishment during the migration. And I thought a moment and I said, those are the service plazas and the rest stops on the highway of life. Just like we do, only we use mechanical stuff, but they have been creating their highway of life and rest stops and service plazas along the way. Isn't that amazing? You look at nature in this regard and you find these types of what James Lovelock, the great biologist, says, the Gaia interaction between all of the species on Earth and the planetary system itself. Amazing new ways of looking at this question. And it's been opened up because we have gone into space. We have looked at ourselves from this different perspective. We become overawed with the pictures of Earth from space and said, wow, what is it? Why is it? And we do a research and we find only 2,500 years ago, self-reflection, asking the question of who are we and how do we get here? And what does it all mean? What is mind? Is really a phenomenon we've evolved into about less than 3,000 years ago. We're barely juveniles in the evolutionary history of this planet. Those are very heavy things to think about here on a Friday morning, but that is what I have done for 30 years, is ponder those issues and help revise the science and break out of the traditions that have trapped us, as it were. They've worked fine up to this point, but we have to go forward. Because, as we know, we do not, many of us know as we've studied, we're not in a sustainable civilization. We cannot continue to despoil the earth, the environment, in the way we have done. Our technological greatness, our scientific greatness has brought us a way of looking at things and conquering things that cannot be sustained because it's all taking place on a geometric growth path. And a finite little planet cannot sustain geometric growth. That's where we are. And it all goes back. I've served on the sister ships of this great aircraft carrier, the Ticonderoga and the von Hammerschard during the Korean War. I've flown up, came on this right at the end of the Korean War, flying jets. And I'm proud to have been a part of all of this effort. But I'd spent my life in the military, 22 years in the military, I spent my life hoping that I could make that profession obsolete, that we humans would find a way to move beyond and to solve our conflict short of killing each other. And that is a hope that I still hold for the future, that as we come to understand ourselves better, we will be able to move beyond that way of resolving our conflict. At the moment, as we look upon Earth and its civilization and the various parts of the globe, that seems like maybe a forlorn hope. But I don't think so. I think those of us who are a little more elderly here, and I understand we have a centurion in our midst. Congratulations, I'm only 30 years behind you. I hope that when some of the younger people have reached our age by the end of this century, then maybe we will be much closer to finding a way to live together as the citizens of Spaceship Earth in a far more cooperative and harmonious way than we do today. Just like the crew of this great ship, we have to work harmoniously, constructively, productively together, or else you can't function. And as we become a more integrated civilization, and we become more global and interact on a daily basis, and it only takes 90 minutes to circle this globe in a spacecraft. As that progression takes place, we must find ourselves more and more in peace and harmony and able to trade amicably and resolve our conflicts in ways that our ancestors and previous generations have never had the opportunity to do. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I'm very honored to be here today and participate in this great event. Thank you.
We're going to go from transponding photons into something a little bit lighter. We're going to have the honor of having Dr. Mitchell cut a ribbon that has been affixed to the training module.